Ian McCreary, and we're at the Grain Summit in Saskatoon. When you spoke, you said that you believe it's not just a rail issue, the grain logistics woes. What did you mean by that?
Well, what I meant by that is that all of the players in this system have to be involved in planning, and we've only got perhaps 21 million tons of export capacity through the West Coast, and there was no process to send the signal that we needed to move some of this grain in different directions, and that we needed to have a planning function that sent the market signal to the railways so that they could do their planning well in advance of the crop year. There was no communication piece involved to sort of see how the aggregate sales commitments were developing by the different players from different companies. So everybody was overselling the West Coast capacity, and there was no way that we were going to have anything other than a wreck.
So starting with the communications problems, what are some of your proposed solutions to that?
Well, you know, I'll be quoting other people from the summit here, but the suggestion is we need perhaps StatsCan or the Grain Commission to play a very public role in getting a lot better crop estimation procedures up earlier in the year so that everybody can have that information to go forward. I'd like to see what was a grain transportation agency or a similar body. I use that terminology because that's what it was called historically, of 5 or 6 people that essentially started to sit down early with the railway companies to say, this is the number, this is what we need to build an aggregate service plan for, and then to provide some transparent market mechanism or other mechanism to have those cars allocated among all the users.
And you talked about forward contracting?
Yeah, right now we're in a position where you can forward contract with farmers to deliver the grain, you can forward contract with customers to have them purchase the grain, but you can't get fixed firm contracts to move that grain. And so you essentially put yourself on a waiting list to say, I'd like to be added to the waiting list for rail freight. And the result is that nobody knows when you've hit a target, nobody knows when you've hit a limit, and we end up just with a big mess. We end up with 40 boats waiting at the West Coast and customers being mad and boats being pulled into port and loading part loads and being pulled back out. We end up with a situation where the price at the West Coast is somewhere around $11 a bushel, and the price in my hometown is $6 a bushel, which is a $5 spread, and there's probably only $2 a cost between those two locations. So there's $3 a bushel getting taken out of every farmer's pocket with a simple lack of planning. So yeah, we got to make some changes. We got to do so reasonably quickly.
When you spoke at your presentation, you said that you don't think we should get rid of the revenue cap.
Right.
Could you expand on that? Why don't you think that's?
Yeah, that's right. The revenue cap is a cap that's been increasing with inflation ever since '92, and it was actually set subsequently in '98, '99, and that revenue cap sets an absolute limit. But because it is set so high relative to what competitive market rates would be, there's all sorts of room for negotiation in and about that. And right now, we're in a place where there's absolute constraint. And so the railways will be in a position to say, if you really want to get your grain to port, you can pay me an extra $3 a bushel, right? And so you'd see the railways capture all of that basis, and we need to not be building into permanent railway profits. We need to be building that into the solution. We need to have a solution that sees those come back towards cost rather than simply have the railway capture that revenue.
And another solution that you said is increasing the capacity at the West Coast. Whose job would that be to do?
Well, you know, the simplest, I think, way to increase capacity at the West Coast would be to improve the running rates. Right now you've got two railways that have trains meeting each other in the night every few minutes, and they have to stop and wait at every siding to go past each other. As someone said, if we were to build a rail infrastructure, we'd never consider doing that for highways, to where you had to stop at a side road in order to let the oncoming traffic go by. And we have two railways going through the mountains, and if we can figure out how to get one-way movement on those tracks part of the month or something in order to get that rail capacity increased, we wouldn't have to increase rail capacity very much before the limit would be terminal space, terminal capacity, ship loading capacity. So there are, that's why it takes a planning process to build up this in a sort of a stepwise process. It is clear right now in this winter the stopping point was the rail, but we wouldn't have to go very far before the stopping point would be a different point in the value chain.
Do you think that we'll ever see that CP and CN getting along enough?
You know what? Right now there's what's called the Fraser Canyon Corridor Agreement, which means that along the Fraser Valley, there used to be two rail lines that CN had one and CP had the other one, and they were right beside the canyon, and they each went both ways on those two tracks. They didn't have any passing tracks in that because it was very rugged, and they found a way in and of themselves to agree to just say, I'll go one way on this, you go the other, and we'll go the other way on yours. And that was without any oversight by the regulator to say, listen, you have to find solutions. They simply did that of their own. Now, they did that in a context when the government was threatening regulation if they didn't solve the problem. And that's always been the case. Railways tend to be a lot more creative when you threaten to take action against them, and I think having some pressure on the railways usually helps them to be a bit more creative.
It's been argued that there should be increased competition amongst railways, but if you do that, it seems like the logistics get worse. Do you think that there should be more competition? Or
Yeah,
there should be
I think that's one and the same with more competition, because once you run on each other's tracks, that's how competition happens, right? Competition doesn't happen by building another rail line. Competition happens by essentially separating what I call above and below the wheel. So in other words, what we did in the telecommunications sector was that infrastructure was owned by one company, and sort of the offering of service was owned by other companies. And that is possible in rail, and we could do that with just the West Coast corridors, and wouldn't have to be just the two current carriers that were involved in those one-way moves.
What are the next steps for you, and should they be for the people?
Going home to Cav.
It's not just a grain farmer then.
No, we got calves coming. No, I'll be, yeah. You know what? I was asked by the people, because I've had a history in this transport file, to come back and sort of provide some of my perspective. I'm a full-time farmer. I've got cattle to manage. I've got a grain crop to put in the ground. I will remain involved. I'll remain in discussion, but I'll be frank. I'm not going to be the leader that drives the change in this piece, because I got work to do.
So we have to find a new leader.
We have to find other leaders. That's right. We have to find people that are prepared to throw ideas. What I was asked to do today was to say, listen, I've been involved in this industry for 30 plus years. I've got ideas. Throw them out there, right? Put ideas on the table. Let's brainstorm. We're at the brainstorming session now, and if we get into next winter and there's more sessions to sort of raise them, I'll be prepared to come, critique ideas, help people process ideas. I'll certainly be pushing my Grain Commission people in Saskatchewan to look at more price transparency, more and better information. But those are what I see as the first steps.
Hey, if there's somebody else that wants to get involved in this debate, what should they do? Who should they contact?
I would say the farm groups. They should be contacting the farm groups they're comfortable with. My colleague there, Harvey McEwen, said, there just isn't a real demand for farm groups right now. They're not getting a lot of activity, but I think people need to be involved in their farm groups and have these discussions at the farm group level. We need a coalition of farm groups to be willing to pick up these issues, and whether it's National Farmers Union or the Wheat Growers or the Agriculture Producers Association of Saskatchewan in Saskatchewan, those groups need to get together and sort of create farm advocacy, because the farm interest isn't at the table.